Welcome to Fundraising Stories with Female Founders. I'm Julia Elliott-Brown, the founder and CEO of Enter the Arena. I'm a serial entrepreneur and an expert in raising investment and business growth. Our mission at Enter the Arena is to empower female founders to fly through pre-raise and investment and onto the exponential growth of their business with investment expertise and business coaching. Here we share the stories of inspirational female founders who've raised investment to inspire you to do the same. You'll hear their honest accounts of what it was really like to secure funding, the highs, the lows, and the challenges they experienced on the journey. And along the way, we'll discuss top tips for how you can be successful too. Today we have not one but two fantastic female founders to share their fundraising story. I'm talking with Cecily Motley and Ilana Lever, the co-founders of Motley London, a website that brings consumers exclusively designed, affordable jewellery from the world's leading designers. Cecily and Ilana met at Balliol in Oxford in 2006, where they studied history together. And after university, Ilana went on to specialise in strategy and consumer goods, working for a number of high-profile brands including Accenture, Argos, Itsu, Innocent and Heist. Cecily took a slightly different route, initially working at Christie's before taking on a role as gallery director at the Louisa Guinness Gallery in Mayfair, which specialises in jewellery made by artists. And their combined but very different experience helped them to spot an opportunity in the jewellery market to bring beautiful yet affordable, exclusively designed pieces to consumers and to connect and communicate with them in a much more engaging way than traditional big brand jewellers were doing. And so in 2017, the idea for Motley was born, and I have to say their jewellery is absolutely beautiful. Since launch, Ilana and Cecily have raised £365,000 to fuel the growth of their business. So let's find out how they did it. Welcome, Ilana and Cecily.
Hi.
It's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. So first of all, I'm actually really intrigued to know kind of a little bit more about the start story of your business, because you met in 2006 and it was 2017 when you got together to start this business. So tell us a bit more about how that all happened.
Well, it slightly starts with me in the sense that I had been working in this very strange corner of the art world where we would collaborate with these big contemporary artists like Anish Kapoor and Jeff Koons, and we would get them to make jewellery, which we would then sell mostly to art collectors. And whilst I was doing that, I noticed a few things. Number one, a lot of contemporary engagement in this not stones but design-led jewellery. And I was asked quite a lot, okay, where can I find this? And the answer was, well, unless you've got loads of money, the answer is it's quite hard to find. The other thing that we were working with these designers, and the more I worked with designers rather than artists, I realised that jewellery designers had a really difficult path to market. So what we had was interest in a product that was too expensive, difficult for designers to get to the market, and then looked out and we started to talk together, Ilana and I, about this at the rest of the market. And we realised that, Ilana will talk a bit more about this, that actually how our big jewellery brands, there doesn't seem to be that much good design and their messaging seems to be quite antiquated. So we got to October 2017, had this idea of putting somewhere where the designers could be at the forefront and that could change the messaging.
Yeah, and I mean, it came from a really informal conversation. So I got made redundant, as all good found stories can start. And I was texting, trying to find myself. And I was actually texting Cecily from a yoga retreat, embarrassingly. And I said, should we start a business? I think once we discussed starting a bakery, Cecily said, well, I've got this idea. And this was all over text. And that was kind of how that first conversation happened. And she had observed these effective massive structural problems within the jewellery market. And it's a market that everyone thinks they know, but didn't realise how broken it was. And as we were talking, I thought, well, isn't that weird that actually kind of the consumer end of the market is broken as well? Like, brands don't represent the consumer. No one's loyal to brands anymore. buying jewellery online is really hard, and their messaging is, man, buy your wife this sparkly thing and she'll love you forever. But women buy jewellery for themselves and for other women, and men buy jewellery for themselves as well. So we were like, wow, everything is broken. And it went on from there.
Wow, amazing. And you guys had stayed friends throughout since university, I guess.
Yeah,
that's nice. And so, but the timing was right for you. And also, I mean, it's interesting what you say about being made redundant. I remember when I started my last business with my sister, she took voluntary redundancy, and it was the kind of key that enabled us to do it. I don't know if you found that, but I think when you're in a corporate job and it's quite easy to be sucked in with the salary, sometimes it takes something, doesn't it, to kind of go, actually, you know, sod it, let's do it.
I think that is important. I think a lot of people talk about bravery in doing it. And I think it can be really helpful when you get an external push, because it makes the reality of, for example, not working or for a lot more real, and things that are real are actually often much less scary than the concept. So push is really helpful.
I guess at the beginning, of course, you can't really take a salary out of the business. So you have to be in a position where you can do that financially. So did you see that you only had a certain runway, a certain period of time where you could actually do that?
Well, we didn't start full time at the same time. I was the first 6 months from 2017, and then Ilana joined. She started consulting, and then we're like, okay. Also, because I think, you know, when you want to start something, you need to be sure that it's a big decision, that you need to know that this is right. And as we kind of built momentum, we then went to fundraise together, got all of our ducks in a row, and then went to fundraise together. And Ilana joined after 6 months. Also, obviously talking about it before then. So it's tough. It's a long year of no salary and no certainty. I did a lot of tutoring in between. It is really tough. And I'm lucky that I have a husband who could help me with rent so that I could not take salary for a year. It is tough, and you do need to be in that position with some support around you, whether it's family or husband or whoever. And I think I can see why that must be daunting for a lot of people. You know, we had to, in that year, signed up 5 designers who had to just take a punt on us. Remember, what we do that's quite unique about our business is that we get these big names who've never heard of Motley, and we're like, hey guys, why don't we use your name to sell our new brand? It's going to be great. And not only that, it's going to be affordable. So all these people who aren't your normal collectors, this is what we're going to do. So we had to convince all those designers to design, sign up, convince people to give us money. It was a lot to do in that time. Find a manufacturer. It's a lot to do in a year.
And I think just going back to the salary point, so Seth said she did it, for actually, I think in total almost a full year, but with a very clear end time frame in mind. And we said, and because I came on later and was working freelance for a bit, that if we couldn't raise in the allotted time, she would go back to working. I could keep going to the end of the year by myself. But I think something that's very challenging about the narrative of fundraising is you are expected to put in the hours and work for free and put in your own money. And what that means is that only a certain demographic are able to do this. And often that demographic leads to white men. We are lucky to be in advantage, as Esther says, family, friends, like the jobs that I had previously, I'd saved up for this. But I think that whole narrative around putting your own money in and going without a salary can be very, very detrimental to getting diverse founders.
Yes, I think you're right, actually. And it's why you tend to see the average entrepreneur is around 40, which I think people are surprised at because they assume it's this kind of young, pot noodle eating, sort of fresh out of university type. But it isn't. It's not. And I think you have to build up the resources and the network before you can really step into the world of entrepreneurialism.
Yeah.
You're right. It is challenging. And I think for women, it's challenging. I remember being in that position because you kind of think, oh God, I've got to rely on my husband or boyfriend or whatever to kind of support me through this period, which I don't know about you guys, but I didn't really like having to do that. I was like, I want to be a woman, stand on my own 2 feet, but I can't do this without that support around me. So that I think that brings quite a lot of pressure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
And
so, so
smart earning is, it's psychological. I think it's not about money in bank, that's part of it, but it's about value, it's about worth. You are doing something that hasn't gone out into the world yet. You haven't, the materiality, I don't know if you felt this, but personally, when we had that product, something physical in your hand to show, and I really feel that for kind of tech entrepreneurs, before you can start that feedback loop, is you've just got blind faith that you've got nothing coming in, nothing else showing your value. It's just, it's tough.
Yeah, really, really tough. But you, like you say, you planned from the get-go that you were going to have to raise money, right? That was something you had on the agenda. So did you do kind of like a business plan with financial forecast before you started the business?
No. Did you? What? Kind of everything moved together. I have to say maybe that we are unusual in that from the get-go was no messing about. There is a stock implication here. There is a marketing implication here. This will not work if we don't have capital. So I think even from the beginning, how we were setting things up, we were thinking about proof points. What do investors need to see that this is going to work? So we knew, but it's not good enough to go to an investor and be like, we have a feeling. we think.
But I think Sessa, so I started coming on as kind of like just an advisor. And I think that was one of the first things that I worked on you with, was building out the financial business plan, which has not been, some of it is completely wrong, but some of it has been quite close to accurate.
Yeah, that's amazing.
The only people that can be proud about that is ourselves, but that's still, that's something.
But actually, those proof points, I mean, you're right, you're thinking about investors, but also, I mean, you're the biggest investor in your business. So you need those proof points to know whether you're barking up the wrong tree or not.
Yeah. And I think something that I would probably say that we did, which I think maybe a man wouldn't do, is built the business plan, looked at that final budget, and then found ways to cut it down. Yeah. Because actually, so we brought down we had our salaries as higher, we brought them down, we cut things out. Because, first of all, and we'll go into this, but the initial response to raising money for a jewellery brand is disdain or complete lack of interest. And that's for all sorts of structural reasons, from the fact that jewellery can be a cottage industry, from the fact that you have what are one of our designers, quite funnily called heiress jewellers. So quite wealthy people that like jewellery and think they can kind of make a go of this. Meanwhile, you have these incredibly talented designers that, because you need capital to build your own brand, they end up going and working for large fashion houses and no one's ever heard of who they are. So when you're speaking to investors, what investors know of jewellery is their wife, or, a friend, daughter, sister's a jewellery designer. So because the initial noises we got were along that vein, because we didn't know how to fundraise and didn't have that immediate access, we brought down, we tried to cut down the total amount we were raising. And if there is one thing I would have said to Matt, and we'll be fine, but if there is one thing that I would have said to my former self, is don't do that until someone tells you to do that.
Yeah, that's very what. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line, isn't it? Because in some ways you don't want to raise too much too soon, because you give away too much equity, and actually you do need to be quite canny and clever with your money. So I don't know if there's a right or a wrong.
Yeah.
If you raise too much, it's very easy to be wasteful with that money, actually, in all honesty.
Yeah, and we had that exact conversation on the same thing, which was we were actually talking about this today. I said, if we'd raised twice the amount, we'd have probably just wasted a lot more. And because we have, for what we're doing, been pity bootstrapped, we've come up with some really brilliant solutions as a result of being forced to think about how do you deliver something brilliant and where do you really invest the money in. And I think that's made us a lot sharper. But we obviously would always like more money.
Yeah, I think there is that question though. If you're coming with a product in an industry that people think they know.
Yeah.
And that's hard, because when you're like, okay, I mean, do you really know it? Do you know where the growth is? Do you know how fragmented it is? Do you know, okay, what are the top 6 and what percentage of the market do they own?
Actually, do you understand why it's a fragmented market? So everyone kept saying it's fragmented, and we said we know, we know the problem, why these brands can't grow, and we are bringing a solution. And the kind of the relief and the light bulb moment. So one of our investors is the director of e-commerce at Liberties, and when we met him, he got it immediately. He was like, "Yeah, jewelry is a massive growth, quite slow to come online. Really understand what you're doing." Absolutely, like, looked at it incredibly mathematically and said yes. Whereas I think something that surprised me was how emotional the responses were of some of the investors in terms of I just don't get it, or I'm just not really into direct consumer, or some of the slightly more insidious ones that I think might be linked to gender, which is just like, I'm just not convinced. So totally unquantifiable, but no quantitative reason why they wouldn't be convinced. And I think between us, we've got a good 20 years of experience of industry and business. And I think that I think something that surprised me most about fundraising in the very early stages was how unmathematical so many of potential investors are.
But I think it's absolutely true what you say. I mean, investors they come in with their heart and their head. And I think many investors, particularly at early stage, they're just not going to put their money into something that they don't understand. That's the challenge. So it's about finding the right fit for the stage of business you're at. And when you're at that kind of launch phase, they're going to go, well, if I don't really understand this, I'm not going to put my money in. So that therein lies the challenge about how to find the right investors. So let's talk about that then for a minute. So you decided to go down the angel investor route. Tell us more about how you did that. You know, how did you find the right investors?
So I think the key to this is that if we hadn't been at the university that we were at, and we didn't have in our network already people doing this, we would have been, I mean, there are times even with that we were like, it's really stuck.
We literally said, I remember saying to Cecily, I don't understand how you do this. Like, I don't understand. I was going on these long angel lists. None of them were getting back. And it really was. So our first investors came through a conversation of a friend of Cecily's from university who works for a VC, very helpful guy, introduced us to some of his angels, and a couple of them engaged, didn't invest very much, but engaged. And I think that gave us the confidence to go forward. Investors came from totally random places. So for example, 4 or 5 of our investors come from someone I worked with at Argos, and I brought him on. He was founder of a startup, brought him on to deliver a program at Argos. We stayed in touch. When we were fundraising, I reached out to him to get advice, and he not only introduced us to a lot of his investors, but invested in the business himself. So that was kind of a story of how random investment can be, and sometimes the people that you expect to invest don't invest, and then it can come from mysterious places. But what I would say is, as we had more to show for it, as we had the product and the packaging, and we one of our investors put in some money early so we could get to launch, I think our confidence showed, but the quality of our investors and the ease with which we could explain ourselves definitely ramped up.
I mean, you've sort of fit the profile of a typical seed raise, I think, which is where the people that are most likely to invest in you are either people that know you really well or know your industry really, really well. And it's that kind of 6 degrees of separation thing. I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't look hard enough in their own networks, partly because they're afraid of asking people they know because it feels awkward.
We literally,
and also they just make assumptions that these people haven't got money to invest, and as you say, it can be quite surprising.
And I think what was really interesting for me as well, because I had in my mind, like my old clients, they're interested. I think there is a broader gender conversation about appetite for risk, and which is so interesting in a business like this, of okay, you get the product, you get the market. Actually, do you need more convincing for being a woman because your appetite for risk isn't so high? It's a very interesting dynamic that I really wasn't expecting.
I think the other thing that that really helped us is we have two investors, very small tickets that are very successful direct to consumer entrepreneurs. So we have Taimur Ategechi of Papier and Aaron Gelbert of Bloom and Wild. And when both of those, Taimur and Cecily were bouncing ideas off each other for 6 to 9 months.
Really early.
Aaron's been a mentor for the last year or so, and for them, they were like, we back you. This is really interesting. They get the kind of demographic and we back you. And the irony is, by having those men who had succeeded in women-oriented business, I think other men felt more relaxed about backing it. But to go back to what you said earlier, thank God we're not raising for organic tampons, because it's quite hard with jewellery, but I can totally see that if by explaining a market to someone that really has no engagement or interest with something like jewellery where they find it boring, which is even worse than not knowing about it, that is a hard bridge to overcome, and the people that are interested don't always have the money. So I wish we'd been able to meet more female investors. I wish we had a more female dominated cap table, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. Trying to explain a product which is marketed to women to male investors is really hard. And often, I mean, they take the lazy approach, I'm going to be honest. If it's something like organic tampons, they'll go and ask their daughters or their wives and then decide. Again, they have to somehow connect with it emotionally. Just sometimes the hard facts are not enough.
Yeah.
So the investors you spoke to, I mean, did you speak to many female investors, or was it predominantly male?
We had quite a good conversion rate of the women that we did
100%.
Speak to. We'd be like,
I think every female investor we spoke to invested.
In the end, some of them, to be clear, kind of like a lot of questions, and once that was through, they were fine, but
far more rigorous.
Really, a lot of.
They were much more analytical than the men. They asked a lot more of the mathematical questions. Something else that I found interesting is a few of our peers invested, again on small tickets, and they were a lot more mathematical than some of the more seasoned investors who were kind of taking a punt.
Well, I think that's right. The seasoned investors know that all your numbers are basically going to be rubbish.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they're not made up, even if you put hours of sweat into the assumptions that go into those, nothing ever really comes out as you planned. So they know that. Okay. Can I ask you how many? So 365 was it, the raise?
Yeah.
How many investors did you have then in total for that raise?
More of a curated crowd fund, I would
22.
say.
Ouch. Okay. How the hell did you herd all those sheep? I'm intrigued to know.
You know what? I think that was our point of saying about I think occasionally maybe we were a little bit of a punt for some of them. I don't know if that's right, whether that's a compliment or not.
I think the fact we have so many investors shows that just slightly more cautiousness of investing in women. When we raise our next round, I think we'll find it much easier, because then they'll see some kind of proof. But first of all, I don't mind having that many, because I see it as a badge of honour. Second of all, they're not problematic at all. And what we have is, by letting people invest on small tickets, expertise, really amazing expertise that we wouldn't have. I think the other thing to say is that a venture capital fund offered us the full round. And one of the key reasons we turned it down was because of some of the angels on our cap table, not because of the size of their checks, but because of the experience they brought.
And did the VC, was their condition upon investing that they were the sole investor?
Yeah.
How did that feel, turning down a VC?
Terrifying.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
It was really scary.
Was it?
Because we'd only raised, this is when I started speaking to you actually, but we'd only raised about 150k. We were going into the summer. We'd had a lot of pushback, and it just felt wrong. It didn't. There were a few things. This particular venture capital fund offered their investment in stages. We didn't think that that was the right, that wouldn't help us grow properly. They were obsessed with one of us being CEO. And we said, we have a very collaborative relationship. We have a very clear division of responsibilities. And it's very interesting. They kept pushing and pushing and said, but how do you make decisions? You need one person to make decisions. And going away and reflecting on it, I wish I'd said, well, how do families work? That's such a, again, I think it's a very male concept. You need one person and one chief, but actually, Cecily and I come from quite different perspectives. And when we disagree on something, what we normally come out with is way better than either of our opinions in the first place. And I think that desire to kind of create some sort of hierarchy between us also made us a bit nervous.
I think that's fascinating what you say, because I think this is where the VCs wonder why there are so few women that want to work with them now, because there is a real backlash against VCs from female founders. That is a classic example where they're so prescriptive about what they expect you to do in terms of things like structure, that there's got to be a big shift in the industry about learning how women like to work and how women like to build their businesses, and it's not necessarily the same as the way guys want to do it.
And it also doesn't mean that they're not going to grow fast. It doesn't mean that they don't want to grow fast.
And we knew that it was an issue, because I asked the question, if we are delivering the growth that we expect to deliver, would you still put pressure on us to have a sole CEO? And they said yes. And when you get an answer like that, you're like, well, if you're that stuck in your ways and you're that cookie cutter, you're not the right partner for us. And also, number one rule, culture is king. So if you've created a brilliant concept between two people, to try and mess with that is a very dangerous and unnecessary thing. But I think that's only one facet in what you alluded to, which there must be so many more, where VCs try to impose certain types of behavior that they think are startup behaviors, but are actually male behaviors.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I know you've said to me is that you felt you had different questions asked to you throughout the investment process that perhaps you wouldn't have been asked if you were two male founders. What was your experience of the kind of questions you were asked? Where do you feel you were pushed harder?
It's so difficult to discuss this one, because I think for a lot of those investors who ask those questions, if you were to say to them, is it because we as women, they would be really appalled. And they would say, no, it's because I'm a thorough investor. But I think that I'm thinking about one particular scenario where we were talking about something, we were actually talking about manufacture. And I think, and this in a way was a real lesson to me, I know it very well. So I know the possible stress points, but I know the ins, the outs, the difficult bits. And actually, when asked the question, my answer was almost kind of like a history essay of like, well, these are these reasons and these are these reasons, but ultimately this is the answer. And I just do not think that was appropriate. I think that made them feel they're not reassured that I know all the bits of this. They were like, oh, that sounds like hesitation.
Yeah.
It's just and I think little ticks like that, I think, and then ended up being really grilled on it when actually it was a very, very thorough answer. I think the real answer should have been like, that's it, end of question.
And a funny thing in reverse, this is just about like institutional approach to this. We, another venture capital fund gave us free office space for 3 months. They had a program where they would take you in, and then you had to be pre-seed, and they would assess you over that period and invest at the end. And in the end, just the timings didn't work out. We'd already raised by the time it got to that. But the partner managing us said, God, we're just so surprised you delivered everything you said you were going to do. And we were like, well, obviously. And I think there's so much like bombasticness and going to take over the world and going to do this. And when you come in and go, no, we're going to do this incredibly well, they're like, why aren't you telling me you're better? there's a lot around that language. We were also mansplained to a few times, I would say. There was an investor that said to us, I just don't think women buy jewellery for themselves.
Yeah, that was good.
I love that. I mean, what the hell?
Probably isn't for you then, mate, is it?
Clearly doesn't have any women in his life.
But I think it was less the questions. There was no overt sexism. It was more the responses, the comparison of how much they invested, and the inability to explain why they didn't invest. Some people could not give an explanation as to why they didn't invest, and I don't think men would have that as much.
Yeah, I mean, most of these things are quite subtle. And as you say, people aren't even aware of it. It's very, very unconscious behaviour that happens in this industry. So it's very, very difficult to kind of really pinpoint it and call it out, because you've got no direct comparison. You can't say, well, here's what happened when I was a man and here's now what happened when I'm a woman, so I can see the difference. You don't know what it would have been like had you been a guy. So it's really difficult to call it out. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's just about becoming more aware of it. But I think the big issue is that we don't have enough female investors. I don't know what you think.
I think that is just definitely it. It's about who's offering the capital and the access to capital. And I think, you have to go through a lot of unconscious bias training even when you're hiring, because a successful person's natural default is, well, I'm successful, this looks like me, it worked for me, so probably odds are, when you have nothing else to go on, like some finger in the air exercise numbers and what you think you know about somebody from 4 meetings, I can see how so easily it happens. Add to that a market that you're not that sure about, you don't really know the numbers on, so I don't think on most of the occasions that it was super conscious. I think there's just, the more women who are offering access to capital, the easier this process will become. And I think for that to happen, you need more people at this stage, which means I think it's about institutional help, helping people with the practicalities. There are loads of women with good ideas. There are loads of women who would be great. But I think that whole daunting element, I think a little bit more faith is needed.
Julia, you just said something very interesting about not being able to do it as a woman and then, do it as a man. And I think what that points out is how much opaqueness there is in that fundraising journey, and how rarely people talk about their failures. So I cannot think of anyone, and now we're quite connected into Founders Community, who's given me anecdotes of people that decided not to invest. But those are the anecdotes that I kind of want to hear. And I think that if we were to start, the more we start openly talking about that, both men and women, I think it will become a lot more obvious. But because people are so nervous about sharing things like valuations, and there seems to be this very closed world during the fundraising process, I think the more you can open it up, the better it will be to create a level playing field.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, is to try and get some of this stuff out in the open. But when you're in the fundraise, people don't want to talk about it. I feel sometimes that women are almost embarrassed that they're fundraising in case people think that their business isn't doing well enough that they need to raise money, which is nuts. Mm-hmm. And certainly people want to keep it close to their chest, but I don't know why. Is it they're afraid that other people are going to steal their investor contacts? It feels like it's competitive and everyone gets a little bit closed. It's a very strange time.
There's a bit of competitiveness. I also think that it's just that feeling of everything. There's a moment where there's so many moving parts. It doesn't matter whether it's 20 grand going on, or 200 or 2 million. The kind of these guys, but these guys back this, and these guys. It's just a big. And you hear, maybe we were just too honest, and we're being pretty honest now about how many investors and things like that. Not everyone does that. They just simply don't discuss that, and if they, that's just not something that is discussed?
What I would say are two positive things. The first is that now that we are tapped into Founders Network post-raise, I think that the community is incredibly generous. And actually there is a lot of sharing, and we just introduced someone to another startup who had just invested in them. And I think that that is like a really positive thing. And I just think it's the earliest stage of the fundraising journey that seems to be more of a problem. Maybe because we had a few friends that were in the space, but actually there are no networks for pre-founders. The networks are all for once you've founded a business. But actually, so I'll say this because it's quite funny and maybe some of our investors might be listening, but we made a cock-up about SEIS, okay? So we knew about SEIS and EIS, and our first investors asked for SEIS, and we thought, well, absolutely, that's perfectly normal. And then our fourth investor asked for pro rata, which is effectively when you take the whole round and you split it. And we were like, we didn't even know that existed. And it's fine, and we got it sorted in the end, and it actually probably works in our benefit because we used it to kind of hasten the closing of the round. But I've even Googled it since, and there's like no advice out there on that. No advice that like when you're planning a round, that is something that you need to decide. Are you doing pro rata or first come, first served? Or interestingly, as one founder we know, not do it at all and just do EIS for various reasons. But I think those kind of things would have been really helpful.
I mean, it's a bloody complicated beast, raising money. There is an awful lot to know. And I don't know if you'd agree, I think as a first-time entrepreneur or first-time out raising money, there's no way that you could know this whole landscape. There's no way you could foresee all of those bombs that potentially can go off at any point. It is complicated. It is complicated. And, you know, I think that's why it's always helpful where you can get support and advice and help along the way. Take it. It's a bit like you wouldn't go and build a website and think, oh, I'll just teach myself to code, because you'd kind of go, well, actually, there's no sense in that. Let me go and find someone who can actually code my website for me.
I think there are just so many, because of that informal network to start, there's so many kind of soft skills, you know, of how you decide to play it. And a lot of slightly more comfortable, probably men are like, well, we are over the halfway mark, round's about to close. They've only got 100 grand of $1 million. Yeah. It's just the way that you approach it. And I think only by kind of listening and watching and seeing how other people are doing it, you're going to work that out and work out how you want to approach it.
But I think one, you know, we're inspired for success for many reasons, but like one reason that I really want this to be a bloody great thing is that so we in turn can invest and start impacting that investment landscape and build really, really great businesses, because there is a massive gap. And I think that when you, I might not explain this very well, but when you come from like a dominant group, like white males, you're not used to thinking differently. When you are in a minority for whatever reason, you think, well, not we're female minority, but you are used to thinking a little bit more differently, but even more can be done around, for example, diversity. So if there are not many white women, imagine how many Black women there are as female founders. There's a really good book called Slay in Your Lane that I would strongly recommend. But talking about like how those challenges that we're facing are absolutely compounded. And I think that it's definitely a discussion that kind of needs to be had.
Yeah, I totally agree. So big challenge there around kind of being a female founder and raising finance. What about other challenges in your round? I know one of the things you've mentioned to me is around timing and the timescales and the time of year. So tell us a bit more about the challenges you had there.
I mean, we were told, but I mean...
But you didn't listen.
Everybody goes on holiday in like July, August. It's like...
Sorry, I'm on my yacht for 4 weeks.
Exactly, they're all off in the Caribbean, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. It's like an actual thing, and it's really important. We didn't have a choice. Like that's when we started. It took us, you know, it took 32 iterations of our deck. We'd never built a deck before. That was when we started. We needed to launch by then. I think if you're giving out advice, if you are forced into that, don't let the summer slowdown think that it's reflective on you. As soon as you go back to September, October, you'll be fine. But if you are starting from dot, do take that into account, because I reckon we would have raised much more quickly if we had been in a different time scale.
And like little tactical things, you know, we say, oh, it took us this long. Most people, they are leading up to this round for 6 months. They're like, well, I closed in 4 weeks. Of course you did, because you've been working on it for 6 months. You know, line those people up. Those are little tactical things that we didn't know about.
But that's just narrative. I mean, I think that's like semantics, because what they were, you know, we talk about starting from when we started conversations. What they did is informal. Oh, I've opened a round, and then, but it was like a different way of doing it and a way to build momentum and excitement. I want to reiterate that we did not have a long list of people to go to. You're absolutely right that at the beginning we did not think creative enough, and I got to the stage personally of literally asking people, are you investing? Have you ever invested? Do you know anyone who invests? And being a bit brazen and not very English about it actually yielded some really positive responses. I think the other thing is no one was offended. So even if they said no, not a single person was offended that we asked for money.
Why would they be? I mean, in fact, you're offering them a great opportunity to join your journey. And if it's not something that's for them, no big deal. We should never feel like we're going with a begging bowl. Ever. And in terms of timescales, I mean, I think, you know, most fundraising rounds take 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And as you said, and it does depend on where you are at the beginning. But I don't know whether you would agree about how long you have to spend nurturing these relationships with investors, because my position on it is, if you've got a great offer and you connect with the right person, it shouldn't take very long for them to kind of go, yes, I'm interested, or no, I'm not. And I think there's a fallacy in the market that, oh, you've got to build up these relationships over years and it's going to take forever. What was your experience of that?
Do you know what? I think the experience of fundraising, we got sharper and sharper and sharper. By the end, there was no question we hadn't been answered. We knew without even looking at each other who would take the question. And I think actually it was even more that, from having spoken to so many different people, having heard this stuff, having tweaked the deck. So like, I'm thinking about one of our large, like, you know, it was a decent sized ticket. He's incredibly experienced retail professional, and he was a one meeting conversation, ribbed us, like really pushed us hard. It was quite entertaining, and it was a yes from him. So that was a one meeting, easily done. And I felt that the last investors came in a lot more quickly.
Yeah, but also because they, you know, the round was nearly full.
Yeah, but you're right. As you get sharper and sharper, you know, you can do it in a meeting.
Yeah,
and there's, you know, I see again a lot of entrepreneurs sort of not getting that yes or no at the end of a meeting, not being bold enough to get that clarity. And so it's quite easy to be led down the garden path and have loads of meetings with someone who doesn't want to say no because they've got this bit of fear of missing out. So they just keep you kind of dribbling along, and it wastes time, like so much.
It's literally like dating. You hear stories of people getting completely ghosted. So they just like zone out. We got stood up 3 times, like actually stood up. The person just didn't show up. So I think that's quite normal. Like everything that can go wrong from a dating scenario, well, not everything, but you get my vibe, can happen in an investor environment. And people are embarrassed about saying no, which I find really strange.
Yeah. I think it's really strange, isn't it? It is really strange. But definitely there's that fear of missing out. Oh, and also they never really tell you why. Because they don't really want to tell you. They can't be bothered half the time. So a couple more questions then. So tell me, what would be your top advice? A couple of things that you would say to any of the listeners, female founders who are thinking about going out and raising finance.
Ask everyone everything. Don't be ashamed to ask any question, however small or stupid or simple. And if one person has answered it, feel free to get answers from 2 or 3 or 4. And cold call people you don't know to ask for advice, because that's also totally okay.
What would I say? I think you have to go in, and it's not arrogance. I think it's about like women and how you value yourself, you have to go in and say, I am the one on this side of the table with the important thing to offer here. It's my time, it's my idea, and all you have to do is write a check. And it's so hard to do that when you hear no, or you're with someone who's very powerful or has invested in lots of things. Just remember, like, you are the important one on this side of the table. And it's almost impossible to do, but if you repeat it to yourself, then maybe 20 meetings later, you will believe it. You know, back yourself. Just
right. Any specific tips on how to keep that rock solid mindset that you?
You drink a lot.
I think it is important to know, especially because like someone who I come from quite a quantitative mathematical background, and fundraising is the least linear thing I've done. So it has nothing, it doesn't go in a straight line. You'll go into one meeting and it will like turn you around. You'll get a call out of the blue from nowhere. So I think the thing is not to think about it as linear. I think that practical thing I said earlier about really do the maths about what you need, and don't cut that number down until you think that you need it. Valuation, try and ask lots of people. We still don't know what other people's first rounds were valued at, and it would have been really helpful to really understand how valuations work. We know a lot of it is kind of hot air, but I think that would be really helpful.
Can I just ask you now? Let's talk about it. Your valuation was 1.4, is that right?
Really, yeah.
Free money. Okay, that's great that you share that, because I think it's really important for other people to know. So one last question. So what's next for you guys? You know, what are your plans? And also kind of tied up with that, do you think you're going to be out on the fundraising trail again soon?
So we are gunning for a seed or Series A about this time next year, and we are working very hard to get our ducks in a row to get that all in order, depending on what we feel the business needs. But I think that's probably what we're going to be looking at.
Cecily and I were talking about this, and there is this, again, there's a narrative around like a big raise is a good thing. And actually, what we'd rather do is say, okay, what do we really need to like turbocharge that growth? We've been really lucky in lots of things. Like we've had some great early sales, loads of positive feedback, some really good press. We've had the standard disasters. Our launch stock got stuck in customs for 3 weeks, so we had to reorder everything. Like, you know, we've had all of those things, but I think we're pushing for a really big year of growth, and I think we might take a bit of bridge funding, but I think it will be easier this time around.
Great, fantastic. And can you remind us of your website in case anyone wants to go and check out your lovely show?
Yes, it's motley-london.com, motley-london.com.
Fantastic. A little bit of advertising for you there at the end.
Yeah, and also we both feel this. You know, I felt very passionately that I needed a mentor. It was so hard looking around. Were there loads of female founders? No. Where were they? I couldn't see them. Were they, you know, we're here. Come, connect. You want to talk about fundraising? We'll do it. Come in. Like,
from a practical perspective,
sisterhood, we're happy to help. So just spread the love.
Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And I hope we'll speak again soon. Can't wait to see you going onwards and upwards, and your jewellery will be everywhere, I'm sure.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for following Fundraising Stories with Female Founders. This content is all provided to you for free, so if you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe so you never miss another one. Enter the Arena has helped hundreds of female founders fly through pre-raise and investment and onto the exponential growth of their business. Our first-hand experience, expert guidance, and proven programs help female founders unleash the Wonder Woman inside. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to www.enterthearena.co.uk. I'm Julia Elliott Brown, and I look forward to talking with you soon.